Who is William James? How did he contribute to psychology? William James is one of the most important figures in the history of psychology. He is often referred to as the first American psychologist and the father of American psychology, shaping the field with his groundbreaking ideas. He also wrote about many other topics, including epistemology, education, metaphysics, religion, and mysticism. To understand his place in psychology, it's important to compare him to Wilhelm Wundt, the founder of experimental psychology. While they were active during the same time period, their methods and philosophies set them apart. Wundt emphasized controlled experiments and precise measurements, but James believed psychology should focus on the function of mental processes and their role in adaptation. This difference would later influence the division between structuralism and functionalism in American psychology. James was born in New York City to a wealthy family who valued education. His grandfather was one of the wealthiest men in the USA, earning his money as a businessman. His family was full of brilliant and motivated individuals. Throughout his life, he would make 16 trips to Europe. Thus, he valued education and would go on to study and work at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. In 1865, William James embarked on a transformative journey to the Amazon with his biology professor, Louis Agassiz. While Agassiz was a strong opponent of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, James found his own evidence supporting Darwin's ideas. This experience shaped his scientific thinking and encouraged him to question traditional beliefs. By the time he completed medical school in 1869, James had already become a well-traveled scholar who spoke several languages. However, despite his medical training, he never practiced medicine. Instead, he followed his passion for psychology and philosophy, fields that would define his legacy. In the 1870s, he traveled to Germany, where he studied experimental physiology with some of the leading scientists of the time, including Hermann von Helmholtz. This exposure to German experimental methods would later influence his approach to psychology, helping him bridge the gap between philosophy and science. James's influence shaped the way psychology developed in the United States, and his ideas are still relevant today. Of course, James made many contributions to psychology, but let's focus on just a few. First, when he returned from Germany, he began teaching physiology and psychology at Harvard University. Starting in 1875, he offered the first psychology course in the United States. At the time, psychology was still emerging as a distinct discipline, and James was instrumental in bringing German physiological psychology to American students. In fact, G. Stanley Hall later wrote that James's courses were the only ones in the U.S. that truly incorporated German experimental methods. James continued to teach at Harvard for over 30 years, shaping the minds of future psychologists. Second, in 1875, James created an experimental psychology lab at Harvard, not as a research facility, but as a way to demonstrate psychological concepts during lectures. This was similar to Wilhelm Wundt's approach, though James was never as committed to laboratory-based methods as Wundt was. Third, he was highly critical of brass instrument psychology, the dominant laboratory-based approach that measured reaction times, sensory perceptions, and physiological responses. He argued that these mechanical measurements were too narrow and reductionist, failing to capture the complexity of human thought, emotions, and consciousness. James also played a crucial role in shaping the next generation of psychologists and leaders. At Harvard University, James oversaw the first ever doctorate in psychology, which was earned by G. Stanley Hall in 1878. Hall would go on to become a pioneer in developmental psychology and a major figure in establishing psychology as a formal discipline in the U.S. James also mentored Mary Whiton Calkins, who became the first female president of the American Psychological Association. Despite completing the requirements for a doctorate at Harvard, she was denied the degree because she was a woman. Nonetheless, she made significant contributions to psychology, particularly in the areas of self-psychology and memory research. His influence extended beyond psychology. James taught E.L. Thorndike, who later became a key figure in educational psychology and behaviorism, as well as Theodore Roosevelt, who went on to become the 26th President of the United States. James's mentorship demonstrates not only his intellectual contributions, but also his lasting impact on students, many of whom went on to shape psychology, education, and even national politics. One of James's most significant contributions to psychology was his groundbreaking textbook, The Principles of Psychology, published in 1890. This two-volume work provided a comprehensive exploration of psychology as a discipline, covering topics such as habits, consciousness, emotion, and perception. Recognizing the need for a shorter, more accessible version, he published Psychology, the briefer course, in 1892. This condensed edition became widely used in classrooms. James outlined a variety of psychological methods, including introspection, experiments, and questionnaires. However, he strongly favored introspection, believing that self-observation provided the best insights into consciousness. Despite his preference, introspection as a method would eventually decline, replaced by experimental approaches. Unlike early psychologists who sought to break consciousness down into basic elements, James argued that consciousness is a continuous and adaptive process. He viewed it as a tool that helps humans quickly solve problems and adjust to their environment. One of his key ideas was the role of habits in human behavior. He believed that habits free up mental energy, allowing us to focus on critical survival tasks, rather than consciously analyzing everything we see, hear, or do. James argued that the rational mind can never fully believe that life has inherent meaning. He recognized that from a purely logical perspective, the universe appears indifferent, and any search for objective meaning seems futile. However, instead of falling into despair, James encouraged us to think and act as if life has meaning. He believed that we create our own sense of purpose through imagination and action. By fantasizing about the future, we give ourselves goals to strive for, which in turn creates a sense of direction and motivation. This act of envisioning possibilities gives our lives structure and significance. But it doesn't stop at imagination. James emphasized the importance of taking action. By actively working toward our goals, we cultivate fulfillment and happiness. In other words, happiness is not something we find, it's something we create through purposeful engagement with life. James believed our thoughts shape our reality. Note this quote, "Believe that life is worth living and your belief will help create the fact." He argued that our mindset influences our experiences. When we choose to believe that life is meaningful and worth living, our actions begin to reflect that belief. We engage more with the world, seek out opportunities, and persevere through challenges. Over time, this belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Our lives gain purpose simply because we acted as if they already had it. James didn't mean that belief alone is enough. He emphasized that belief leads to action, and action creates reality. When we adopt a hopeful mindset and put in the effort to build a fulfilling life, we turn that belief into fact. This idea aligns with modern psychology, showing that optimism, resilience, and a sense of purpose contribute to well-being and success. In other words, by choosing to believe in a meaningful life, we create one. James served as the third president of the American Psychological Association, APA, in 1894. His contributions to the field went far beyond leadership. He helped establish functionalism, a major school of thought in psychology. Although James did not personally identify as a functionalist, he is widely considered its founder. His perspective differed from the structuralist approach, which focused on analyzing the individual components of consciousness. Instead, James argued that psychology should study the function of mental processes and behavior, how they operate in real life, and help individuals adapt to their environment. Functionalism emphasized the purpose of thoughts and behaviors, rather than breaking them down into isolated elements. This approach laid the foundation for applied psychology and influenced later psychological movements, including behaviorism and cognitive psychology. James' ideas helped shift psychology toward a more dynamic and practical science, one that examines how human thought and behavior contribute to survival and success in the real world. James had a revolutionary perspective on consciousness. He described it as personal, selective, and ever-changing. Rather than seeing consciousness as a static collection of thoughts, he viewed it as a continuous stream, constantly shifting and adapting to new experiences. James also believed in the existence of a subconscious, a part of the mind that processes information outside of our immediate awareness. He pointed to everyday experiences as evidence, such as the tip of the tongue phenomenon, where we know we have information stored in our minds but struggle to recall it. He also emphasized the role of habits. According to James, habits free up mental energy, allowing consciousness to focus on adaptation and problem-solving rather than routine tasks. For example, once we learn to walk, drive, or even play an instrument, these actions become automatic, so our conscious mind can focus on more complex decisions. By understanding both consciousness and subconscious processes, James helped lay the groundwork for modern cognitive and behavioral psychology.